Mr. Kind?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, first of all, thank you and Ranking Member Brownlee and all the members of the committee for the courtesy for me to be on the dais. I'm not a normal member of the Veterans Committee, but I do appreciate the oversight, the work, the attention, the concern that you've shown with many of the challenges that we face within the VA system itself, but the VA medical centers. I'm here specifically in regards to legislation that Mr. Adezato and the DAV has endorsed, the Jason Simcakoski PROMISE Act. I've been working very closely with Chairman Bilirakis as well as Representative Rice of this committee to introduce that bill this week. And Mr. Kaufman, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we've got a major opiate problem within the VA system, but not limited to the VA system. I think it's healthcare system-wide that's going to require a lot more care and focus and attention by this Congress in order to make the changes that are necessary. And that's exactly what the PROMISE Act was meant to do. It's named after a constituent of mine, Jason Simcakoski, who lost his life under the care and the treatment of the VA Medical Center in the center of my congressional district in Tomah, Wisconsin. And I've been working very closely with his wife and his father, Heather and Marvin Simcakoski, to get the story out. But that family has one concern on their mind, and that is to work with this Congress, to work with the VA, to make sure that the tragedy that befell their loved one doesn't happen again. And that's the whole intent behind the PROMISE Act. We have companion legislation already in the Senate on this, and again, with Chairman Bilirakis' leadership, we're hoping to be able to introduce something, and we appreciate the DAV's level of input and support that you've given this legislation. In a moment, I'm going to ask you whether the DAV, in looking at the legislation, has any further recommendations in working with us in what you would make. There's one aspect of it I've been especially focused on. It's based on legislation I've introduced earlier called the Veterans Pain Management Improvement Act that I've introduced with Mr. Zeldin and Mr. Ribble, which has established pain management boards. It comes out of the recommendations that the OIG has made on a nationwide survey within the VA system, but also the particular investigations that came out of Tomah in light of what took place there. And what it does do is it changes the delivery of care model, the culture, but probably most importantly, it gives patients and the family members themselves a greater say and a greater input in regards to the treatment regimen. I am convinced that the family members are the first line of defense when it comes to our veterans. They're going to know what's working and what's not working, and we have to make it easier for them to provide that input in regards to the care and the treatment that the loved one, the veteran, and their family is receiving. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that in many instances. That Pain Management Board Act is included in the Senate version. We're still working on whether or not it makes sense or what type of changes have to be made in regards to the PROMISE Act when we introduce it to this week. But Mr. Adezato, if you have anything you want to share in regards to the DAV's insight on this matter, it would be appreciated.
Congressman Kind, thank you for your kind words, your effort in this area. This is a very sensitive issue. Most of our members, if not all, are severely injured with some kind of chronic pain. It's prevalent in our membership. Our members are quite feel very strongly about pain management in the VA. Yes, they're worried, as Mr. Kaufman had mentioned, about overprescribing, but there's also a growing voice that's worried that they're being underprescribed. And if they are in fact being underprescribed, they're trying to seek relief with alternative types of care, which, while they would like to receive, are having a hard time trying to get for a number of reasons. I would love to work with you and your staff on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that aspect because it's so important. There are so many more alternative and complementary forms of care that we ought to be exploring in much greater detail rather than just loading them up on a cocktail of drugs all the time. And I've been aghast with the number of veterans and families who have come into my congressional office with literally grocery bags full of prescription drugs that they're getting from the VA system. And they can't, in their lifetime, take all of that, yet it keeps being sent to them almost on a weekly basis, and they're overwhelmed with it. So I think we have to be a little bit more creative. And one other piece of legislation, if you may, Mr. Chairman, is I've introduced the Veterans Access to Care Act to try to deal with the access and the waiting line issue that we have out there. And what this does is it expands the definition of health professional shortage areas for qualified VA medical centers around the country. It's loan forgiveness, it's scholarships, it's other incentives in order to get the highly qualified and trained healthcare professionals in the VA system in order to address the shortages. And I know, speaking to Toma, I mean, they got a critical shortage of primary care, nurse practitioners. They can't find a dermatologist. I mean, all that has to be farmed out if they're lucky enough to do that. But we're seeing this across the board, these shortage areas in that. And this legislation that I've introduced with my colleague, Mr. Ribble, might be a part of the answer of creating further incentives to get the trained professionals in where we need them the most. But I thank you again for your courtesy, allowing me to participate here today for this important hearing. I yield back.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.